We have a wonderful panel today of experts talking about pride financial planning considerations for your LGBTQIA client. I'm getting a message that there's no audio. Can anybody hear me? Yes. Okay, good. So I'm going to start off by introducing Christopher Stroup, who goes by he, him. He is a certified financial planner for Abacus Wealth Partners, a fee-only firm with a focus on impact and socially responsible investing, diversity and inclusion, and making financial planning accessible. Christopher pivoted, was a former petroleum engineer in the oil and gas industry who received his MBA from Drexel University and then pivoted into wealth management, where he focuses on LGBTQ entrepreneurs and Fortune 500 executives. And in terms of recognition, Christopher was named to the 2021 Investment News class of 40 under 40. And this past year, he found himself on the LGBT Rates Top 100 Game Changers 2022 list. Next, we have Corey Beal, who goes as she, her, and she is the CEO and director of Joy at Empowering Finance, and a very good friend of the Women's Center, I would say. After more than a decade of experience in financial planning and wealth management, she decided to take the leap and launch her own firm where she uses her authenticity, financial knowledge, and a dash of glitter to connect with people and enable them to pursue their own passions and goals. She too has been recognized by Investment News 40 under 40. Deja Foster goes by they, them, and joined the financial services industry in 2016 and have served in various roles with a focus on holistic financial planning. In April 2022, Deja joined Ameriprise Financial Advisor Business Development Group as a financial advice sales consultant. In their current role, they consult with leadership teams and independent financial advisors to organically grow their financial planning business by connecting client goals to resources. In 2019, Deja earned their master's in human environmental services with sciences with a concentration in financial planning and counseling from the University of Alabama. Next, we have Sophia Duffey, who is our colleague at the college. She's an associate professor of business planning and assistant vice president of curriculum quality at the American College of Financial Services. Sophia teaches classes in business and estate planning at the undergraduate and graduate levels, and she began her career at the college in 2012. She received her JD from the Temple University in 2012 and her Bachelor of Science in Accounting from Rutgers University. Oh, and she's a CPA too. So that's our panel, and we are joined today by a friend of the Women's Center, our good friend, Joanne Cleaver from Investment News, who has covered finance, careers, women's issues, retirement planning, and entrepreneurship for over 40 years in a wide array of national media outlets. She's authored 7 nonfiction books, including 3 on small business growth, and most recently 1 on career strategy, The Career Lattice. So now for real, I'm going to hand it over to Joanne, who's going to lead this fabulous panel of experts.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Because the LGBTQIA community is everywhere, advisors and investment professionals can expect to meet LGBTQ people just in the course of everyday business. And understanding the unique stresses and the worries of this community works in several directions. It builds relationships with them directly, but it also signals to families and friends that you and your practice are especially welcoming and non-judgmental as to lifestyle and personal circumstances. So in a lot of ways, the LGBTQIA community aligns with the American population overall. It is true that LGBTQ folks are more likely to live on the coasts, both west and east, and they do tend to be a little younger, with an average age of 37 versus the American population overall of an average age of 48. But about 30% of LGBTQIA folks are parents themselves with kids. About 58% are white and 21% are Latino. The educational levels of LGBTQIA folks aligns almost perfectly with the national average. 14% of all Americans have postgraduate degrees, 13% of LGBTQIA people. But at the same time, Our LGBTQIA neighbors face unique political and legal barriers. While their right to marriage has been upheld by the Supreme Court, aspects of their legal rights as citizens are being challenged and eroded in some states. And any moment, an LGBTQIA American just going about their daily business might encounter points of discrimination or confusion or hostility that the rest of us just don't run into. Not many of us go into a grocery store to order a cake and trigger humiliation, rejection, and of all things, a news story. All this means that welcoming LGBTQIA individuals is an important habit that demonstrates that your practice and your office are thoughtful about welcoming all people. In this session, we're going to start with some of the basic protocols of inclusive language. And then we're going to move on to explore the specific intersections of financial advisory and some of the most pressing concerns right now of LGBTQ clients, and by extension, clients who have friends and family who are LGBTQ. So let's start with language, because understanding the basics of pronouns and inclusive language is just fundamental to communicating with people and to establishing a respectful environment for everybody, but especially for people for whom pronouns have resonant meaning. So Deja, could you just kind of outline this for us?
If I could get myself off mute, yes, I would. Um, well, thank you for having me, and I'm super excited to be here. When we think about pronouns, we have to first think about what they are, right? It's a third person reference to somebody you're talking about. Now, think about how many times someone has used pronouns to reference you, right? As an advisor, as a person. And how it would feel if someone continuously called you something that you didn't choose, right? Because who we say we are matters, right? And so as I think about how can we become more inclusive, how can we start, right? Because a lot of times it's not about wanting to do the thing, it's how do I start? I think about four big pieces, right? Around using using pronouns properly. The first one is create opportunities for people to share their pronouns in one-on-one meetings, during introductions, right? In your email signature. Let them know that it's a safe space for them to show you who they really are, their full, authentic selves. Second thing I think about is if someone hasn't given you their pronouns, it is okay to ask, right? And you can do that by saying, "Hi, my name is Deja. My pronouns are they, them. Nice to meet you. What are your pronouns?" Right? Another thing that I've seen is folks are afraid of getting it wrong, right? So we always want to try and make sure that we're acknowledging someone for who they say they are, right? What their preferred pronouns are. So for me, that's they, them. And when I'm choosing services, when I'm choosing a place for employment, I want to know that I'm going into an inclusive environment where I feel like I can be emotionally safe to show up as my full self. And then finally, as a non-binary person who came out recently, right? It's been hard for me to really s- s- correct people or say something about it. And so having space to also lean on my colleagues to help with that has been really helpful. And it's given me pride to really show up as my full true self and do a better job as well. Right. And I think ultimately we all want to be seen, heard, and valued. And that's what we're doing for our clients when we acknowledge them for their chosen pronouns. And I know that Corey's going to talk a little bit about how we can keep track of this. So I'll go ahead and hand it off to her.
Aloha, everyone. Very happy to be here too. And thank you so much for the American College putting on such an important event as well. And yeah, so I have people come to my website and they want to book an intro call on my book a chat, the first thing is their name, next is their phone number and email address, and then the fourth, category down is what are your preferred pronouns. And I also link to the HRC, I think it's pronouns.org. I think that they're going to be putting in the chat as well. So people who don't really know or aren't familiar, they also can educate themselves on what that is and why it's important too. And then in my CRM records, I had to create a specialized box where I keep track of everybody's preferred pronouns as well, so that it's top of mind. And so I know going into a meeting or a phone call or an email what their preferred pronouns are. And also in my email signature, I have my pronouns.
So, Christopher, what's your experience with translating all of this to a firm's public face through social media?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that one, authenticity is king, especially within this community. When I came out, I said that my authenticity was no longer negotiable, and many members of this community spent years, if not decades, of their life not being allowed or maybe not living their authentic life, and so they know what it looks like to maybe be a fake, for a lack of a better word, in that regard, when someone really doesn't mean it. And so I think it's really important to just lead with authenticity when you are, representing yourself on social media, representing your company and its website, any of the stories that you produce, like come from a centered, authentic self place first. I think it's important to highlight your allyship. If you're not a member of the community, but you're an ally, make that out there, make that known on your socials, on your LinkedIn, any of the Instagram, Twitter, whatever you may use, and put that on your website. Give the community, let them know, they'll see that as a signal, that you are someone who sees them as they are and is willing to work with them. I think that's really important. So using the pronouns that Deja walked through, showing inclusive language on your website, like all of that is important when you think about marketing to this community, and showing them that they will be heard and seen and met where they are when you decide to work with them. I think the last piece is really focus on imagery. Be mindful of the story your images tell. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Did anyone notice the image that was used to start the PowerPoint? It was two men holding hands. I looked at that, I was like, that's me. It's me and my boyfriend right there. That's our story, talking about our finances. Be mindful of those images and the crowd that they're going to attract, because people are drawn to images that reflect their reality or their community. And so if you want to be approachable to this community, ensure that your images reflect those stories and the lives that they lead. And then I think the last nugget here is, maybe you're a member of the community as an advisor, and you're not in a space where you can be out quite yet in the profession, whether it's the workplace or maybe you're not comfortable there yet. Doing this professionally, know that myself, Corey, Deja, we are safe spaces for you to just be a listener and help you sort of, understand that journey. We've been there. We may be out there and proud, and it may seem easy for us, but we had to go through a lot ourselves in terms of working through that as advisors in this profession. That has a lot of work to do working with the community. So know that, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us in terms of maybe wanting to take the next step with your journey as an advisor and reaching out to this community and marketing yourself to them.
In thinking about this session, I recalled the debate when I first started my career way back in, the 80s. The whole debate about whether or not to use the honorific Ms., MS, was just a raging debate from out. I know, right? Super dating myself. But it strikes me that this conversation about pronouns is so similar to that. And it's the exact same cycle of resistance, acquiescence, adoption, and then normalization, right? I mean, I can tell you that there were news discussions back then with editors saying, well, what's wrong with Miss and Mrs.? And all the women in the room saying, because we don't really want to pivot or ground our identity in print on our marital status. And that just sending around the newsroom, that table, kind of shocks of awareness, and you could just see the light dawn. And I think we're almost at the tipping point here in American society, and our practices can be part of this with just extending respect, just leading with respect and asking people, how would you like to be addressed? And yesterday's Washington Post, of all people, Miss Manners, centered on this exact point in one of her columns, and somebody was debating this exact point, and she said, for every single person, the way to respond to any of this is, how would you like to be addressed? That's it. And if Miss Manners says it, we're done here, right? But we're advisors, or we're, in this profession. Well, I'm not, but you guys are. And there's LGBTQI people still need financial advice. And it is complicated a little bit, of course, by some of the ongoing legal controversies, some of the unpredictability of exactly what legal status might be for any person living in especially certain states. So let's drill down to the really nuts and bolts intersection of why LGBTQIA clients might come to you as an advisor, and what are some of these concerns and issues that might get triggered by politics, or that just might force you to work in contingency plans, for example, to make sure that whatever plan you put together is going to be flexible and or easily changed if legal circumstances change and such. So Sophia, tax and estate planning considerations. Let's just get down to the fun part.
Great. A nice segue from what we were mentioning with pronouns, which is, from a legal standpoint, we want to try and minimize the risk for our clients, the risk that something in their estate plan won't reflect their actual wishes. And so if we have a client who has, for example, old documents that may not reflect their current name or their current, their gender identity, or if they're thinking about transitioning, perhaps, we want to have discussions with them about what they would actually like reflected in their documents, right? How would they like to be referred? And you can use flexible language, so that if circumstances change later on down the line, then the documents can still reflect that. But I also think an often overlooked area is how the family members would also like to be referred. So if you have a client who has a child that may be transitioning or thinking about transitioning, we can, for example, say, my child, I'm leaving my assets to my child instead of my son or my daughter, or my spouse instead of my husband or wife, or my partner, for example, if they're not married. And the other thing I would advise advisors to inquire about is whether or not we can use more gender neutral language as far as the legal terminology. So instead of saying executrix or testatrix, those sort of old outdated gender terms, we can use consistent terms throughout the whole document that kind of eliminate the reference to gender so that there's no confusion. Because the more clear we can make our documents and respectful of the client's wishes, the less chance then that disgruntled family members, estranged family members, really anyone can make a challenge to those documents, because that would be kind of the worst possible outcome for the client.
So Christopher, you had some thoughts, I believe, on integrating goals, financial goals, into a holistic plan in a way that would be flexible and resonant going forward.
Yeah, I think really, at the end of the day, you're still working with a human, and you're building a financial plan that is there to serve the whole human. So the execution, how we go about planning, I hate to say it, or I don't want this to seem negative, but it's the same. We do the planning framework that any client would step through our door is the same. And so, it starts with understanding their situation, gathering their current finances. What does their overall picture look like? Setting and prioritizing goals. The goals may just look a little different when working with a member of the LGBTQ plus community. When we think about family planning, could it be adoption? Could it be surrogacy? How do we plan for some of those financial hurdles that could come up, some discrimination that could come up with working in that community as the financial planner? Then helping them understand, okay, how does this picture relate? How does your current picture relate to the goals that you set? Are you on track to meet those goals, or are there changes that need to be made? And what are those changes? And then really lastly, it's putting a plan into action that you've agreed on. I like to say that I'm the project manager of my clients' financial lives as the prior engineer, that those skills still parlay into being a planner. And so it helps, you want to help the client understand, what are you going to take from them to help in terms of execute? What is the client going to own? And then what, tools, resources, individuals do they need to lean on to help, complete the plan and put it into action while continually monitoring it.
So that's the classic approach. Corey, help us unpack that in terms of conversational dynamics and building the relationship. Because of course, for building a practice, if you're going to put all this effort into making sure the person is welcomed, getting off to a great start, you want to get the return on investment in that relationship and have it continue. How does that work out in your experience?
Yeah, I think, first knowing that those of us in the LGBTQIA communities have faced, a lot more discrimination and trauma than the general population, both personally and professionally. And knowing that it's going to take a while to develop a, safe environment where people feel open enough to be able to share their experiences with you. So it's like, think of going to a counselor the first time. They're like, okay, just like, tell me all your trauma and like, what's happening? You're like, it's like not a safe environment. You're not going to feel very welcome. So it's going to take time to build and establish that relationship with them. And one of the tools and processes that I really use for all of my clients is called Money Quotient. And so they're a life planning community with a lot of different resources, questionnaires, tools that you can use to really establish those, that like deeper relationship with clients and really get to understand who they are as human beings and understand, what they value and kind of where they're coming from and what their money stories are as too, because that all is very impactful for the financial planning process, because you really have to know your client in order to be able to give them, the financial plan and be able to really, help them through this process. So it's pretty important.
So Deja, it's my understanding that you've got some observations from personal experience, especially now working with Ameriprise. I would guess that people are bringing you stories from their practices. So help us understand what this looks like on an everyday basis from what you've observed and experienced yourself.
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I work directly with advisors, and I recently had an advisor whose client's daughter came out as trans, right? And the advisor was the first person that her dad told about it, right? And he was really grappling with this newness, right? And trying to navigate that piece as someone who is working to expand his mind. But he also knew that he loved his daughter and he wanted her to be okay. And with all of the legislation we have now around youth trans care, they began to have a conversation around how that would impact their ability to, meet their goals if she needs care, so that she can feel she because she needs care, not so that she can feel, but because she needs care. And you know they were able to talk through and create a plan around what that looks like and continue to monitor it, right? Because things change and we have to continue to monitor and update those plans. And so it's not a one and done, as we know, but it's also not just our clients that we have to think about. We have to also think about our clients' families. And we're all impacted by it in some way because of someone that we love and care for, because 10% of the US identifies LGBTQ, right? So we're closer in proximity than we believe to be.
Well, I love that. Just leading with the expectation that it's about providing for that person and reaching to that universal motivation that most family members and partners have for the people that they love, to make sure that they're going to be okay. I mean, that's ultimately the purpose of all of this, is to make sure that the people you love, that you yourself will be okay through your planning, and the people that you love in that inner circle will be okay. And lucky us here in America, we have a lot of that love comes from employers and employer benefits. So Christopher, let's just, we're just going to run through here, audience, kind of the high points of some of the key employer benefits that might intersect with plans that have particular resonance with LGBTQIA clients. So Christopher, health insurance, what do people need to know?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand the risk profile of the client, just like you would any other client, and know that with the LGBTQ plus community, there is a lot of trauma here. Corey mentioned this earlier. So this could be a really hard conversation, and it may not come out at once or within the first 6 months of your engagement. It may take years for you to build the trust of the client, to maybe have them disclose that they're HIV positive, You know, this, as we all know, it's been a disease that has affected the community greatly, especially, you know, in the late 80s and 90s. But there's still lingering effects of that in those movements. So it's really important to dive into what is their risk profile. You know, I would also ask, you know, as a gay man, you know, a lot of gay men are on PrEP. PrEP is a preventative drug in terms of preventing HIV/AIDS. And there can be a lot of stigma around that when you take that health profile and do shopping around with other insurances that we're going to sort of discuss, you know, because they could be seen as high risk. And so it's helping a client understand that they may have to jump through extra hurdles just because of who they are within the community, and the preventative measures they've been taking may result in more barriers or higher premiums that they have to pay, or just outright refusal of insurance coverage. I think the other piece in terms of the health insurance, and I know Corey will get into a story about this, is really location. Location matters, especially with your employer, because coverage can vary widely depending on where your employer is based, especially in this work remote forward environment that we're now in. That's really key for clients to consider, and for you to help your client walk through and understand once you understand their risk profile.
Yeah, remote work really adds an additional layer of complexity to all of this. So Corey, can you sketch out some of the key considerations for other types of employer benefits that advisors need to just be cognizant of?
Yeah, and just to touch back on what Christopher was saying too, when like things to be aware with health insurance, I think there's an advisor on here that I was speaking with, and they're located in Washington. I'm in Oregon, some more socially progressive states. And their client, you know, had a job in Washington, but now due to COVID, and was able to get a new job located outside of the state. I think they're headquartered in Tennessee. And so this client had a child that was going through you know, going through the transgender benefits and changes, and found out, you know, in Tennessee, they aren't covered the same way that they are in Washington. So they had to go out on the marketplace and get a whole new insurance plan for their child for those benefits. And that's a big impact on their financial plan, and just more costs that, you know, are associated with that they didn't have it with their job in Washington. They hadn't really even thought through too. So really impactful. And the HRC, the Human Rights Coalition, has a great index called the Corporate Equality Index. And they go through and they rate different corporations on all types of benefits. So they have, you know, gender identity in US non-discrimination policies. They have domestic partner benefits. They have transgender inclusive benefits. So you can go through and put a company's name in there and just see how their ratings are, and like how they are working, you know, with those LGBTQ plus employees, and the benefits that they offer, and the policies that protect the employees there too.
And Sophia, life insurance, which is a cornerstone of good financial planning. What are your thoughts on top of mind issues that advisors should be on the lookout for that?
Yes. So one of the really nice sort of movements that we've seen with life insurance companies is that more and more states are adopting, and more companies are adopting unisex underwriting options on their application. So applicants can select that, or some companies are just doing that on their own, and they're sort of removing the variability of gender. So that allows more fair or more sort of neutralized underwriting. And then to Christopher's point, you may have to, you know, advise a client. Unfortunately, if they are, for example, taking PrEP, because of that, they may be placed in a higher risk category, and they may be faced with unfavorable premiums due to that, or a declined, you know, application. So that's sort of a risk factor they should be aware of. The other nice thing, though, to kind of counterbalance that is that we have the, you know, movement we've seen with more life insurance companies being more inclusive in that way. And then also, life insurance has always traditionally been a very really all the kind of non-probate transfers are nice, secure ways to pass assets to individuals that are not as susceptible to challenges by family members. So by naming a partner, for example, as the beneficiary on a life insurance policy, that almost ensures that will be paid to the beneficiary named. It's not subject to will contests. Only under very, very rare circumstances would something like that be overturned by, you know, a familial challenge at a probate court. So by, you know, if we have a client that has not conflict with their family, and they want to ensure that these assets go to their partner, that life insurance designation is going to be a nice way to accomplish that.
So some of this addresses, honestly, just ongoing family dynamics that you could run into in any family. And these tools are well established, should be readily available, correct? Yeah. Okay, good. Well, let's dig a little bit more into taxes. I understand. Now, audience, I hope you're sitting down. We have some slides. So brace yourselves. We have some slides about taxes and estate planning tools. So Chris, carry on.
Yeah, so I think, we wanted to show marital tax advantages and then, mitigating strategies for unmarried partners. So I think a lot of us on this call are likely familiar with the marital tax advantages in terms of, how it plays out in retirement and income tax. And so what I would like to really more focus time is on the mitigating strategies. If you could skip to that, at least from the income tax perspective. So, if we have unmarried partners, how can they still make smart tax maneuvers financially? And so really, these first two bullets are largely around shifting assets to the lower income partner if there's a large disparity between the two partners, or maybe one is not working. So think about how can we take advantage of favorable tax rates, whether it's for dividends, capital gains, that we could shift to the lower income partner to maybe ensure no tax or little tax relative to the higher earning partner. I think home ownership is another big one. Married couples have the $500,000 exclusion. Non-married partners can still have a total of $500,000 excluded. They just both separately need to qualify for the residency and ownership test. So I think it's important for you to understand in the conversation you're having with a client that maybe if they don't qualify for it this year, it's a year away. Maybe they delay selling. An important conversation to have with them in terms of how to mitigate taxes on that front. And then the last one is understanding itemization and deductibility. What's happening on their tax return? Is one taking the standard deduction? Is another itemizing? Can we shift itemized characteristics to the higher earner to maximize the tax benefit, and then allow the low income earner to take the standard deduction if they're not itemizing anything? These are conversations, considerations that we're having with clients, and then I think you all should bring the CPA into the conversation, because ultimately none of these go off without the CPA's approval as you're working as a team with them.
And then if we could jump to the next slide, I'll just talk briefly about some estate and gift considerations. So many of us are familiar with, the marital advantages from an estate and gift tax perspective, and knowing that most people don't pay estate and gift tax anyway. I really wanted to focus more on kind of two aspects that you can advise clients on that may be more applicable to them. The first that is on the slide there is powers of attorney and guardianship. So with a married couple, if one individual, say, goes into some kind of long-term care situation or they're incapacitated, the power of attorney sort of authority will default to their spouse. So, their doctors will go to their spouse and ask for their consent to do certain things in most states. If they're not married, though, that unmarried partner, even if they're a long-term partner, they will have no legal standing to make those medical decisions. So you may have a horrible scenario where you have estranged family members or family members that don't have the best interest of that individual at heart, and they are making medical decisions for them. And it could be as extreme as taking that person off of life support, knowing that the family also might inherit all of that person's assets because they never put a will together. So, you don't want to terrify your clients, but you do want to let them know this is a major risk area, particularly, again, if they're not married. But they can overcome that fairly easily by putting together medical power of attorney documents and financial powers of attorney, and that they will clearly name the individual as their agent, and then that person will have the standing to step in and make those decisions for them. And then I also wanted to talk earlier briefly about adoption and guardianship. So for minors, if you have an unmarried couple and they have a child, and the child is biologically related to one parent and not the other, if something happened to the bio parent and they were incapacitated or they prematurely died, that non-bio parent may not necessarily have the legal standing then to take custody of the child. Most courts will default to what they think is in the best interest of the child. But unfortunately, as you mentioned, with the political sort of goings on in certain states, we know that some states and courts are not friendly to LGBTQIA families. So we cannot rely on the court system to just assume that it's best for the child to stay with the couple. But again, we can protect the couple against that by putting together guardianship documents where the non-bio parent is named as the guardian of care for that minor child. So even if they're not married, that will ensure that they will have the legal standing to take care of that minor child.
And we keep centering, this conversation keeps coming back to families and family dynamics. And that's where we're going to circle back for the final section of this webinar. And that is how that being accepting, welcoming, non-judgmental of LGBTQIA clients actually creates this halo effect where other people observe that. They might be family, they might be friends, they might be community members or just in some business group, but they hear you talk respectfully about these clients and see themselves in those stories. And it becomes a universal story. And they realize, oh, wow, this advisor really is extending themselves to be approachable, to be welcoming, to really listen deeply, to be non-judgmental. And the first story for Investment News that I did on this topic a year ago, it was kind of sweet and beautiful. I was talking with several advisors who said that they have gotten a steady stream of referrals from from clients, LGBTQIA clients, who just went back to their family and friends and said, wow, that was way more than just cleaning up my spreadsheet or helping me align, some of my assets with my employer plan or whatever it might be. But it has this really glowing halo effect. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time on that dynamic because referrals are so critical, and this is such an unexpected benefit of working with this community. So Deja, can you help us understand what you've observed in your own experience and at Ameriprise that goes to this dynamic?
Absolutely. So I actually hosted a LGBTQIA Mastermind this year for a group of our advisors who were either in the community or wanted to be allies and serve their clients, right? And I got the idea from FBA, from prior planners, right? Um, and our advisors saw tremendous value, even some of our advisors who were older in the community, because things have changed as well as we continue to grow and evolve. And they wanted the opportunity to continue to learn and grow. And so I think the first step is really us finding opportunities to learn, to get uncomfortable and stretch ourselves, right? Um, Oftentimes we feel like we have to absolutely understand the thing before we can respect it. And I think we have to respect people and care for people, right? And work to understand what it is that you're trying to. I think empathy and emotional intelligence is really big. And so for allies who are wanting to learn, who want to lean in and are okay with the uncomfortable part of it and making mistakes, right? Um, HRC is a great place. They have a tremendous amount of resources. And one of the first things that they say is if you make a mistake, apologize and move on, because at the root of it, if you are trying to create a safe and organic space, you are going to mess up, but it's going to be okay, right? As long as, like Chris said, we are showing up authentically and trying to serve our whole full client for who they are and not who we want them to be. Another resource that I think is really important is we've talked about the discrimination that LGBTQI folks experience. And so being sure that when we're making referrals, we're also considerate of the fact that not all places are safe. So SAGE planning works with the elders of the LGBTQ community and making sure that our advisors have the resources they need to, create the networks and provide the planning that for their older clients, LGBTQ clients, right? And helping close that gap. So I think there are a lot of things out there, but what I have seen is our advisors who are serving all of their clients, right, authentically and fully, they see tremendous referrals. They were leading in our mastermind with results because of the experience that those clients were having. They knew that they were being taken care of and that they were being heard. And that's the important part that we do as advisors to serve our clients and address their needs.
I love that that actually can get quantified in a dashboard, and I think that that's love. We all love a dashboard, right? Corey, what's been your experience?
Yeah, I think it's just staying curious and knowing that you absolutely will make mistakes and that's okay. And again, like just kind of saying what everybody else said, but leading with kindness and authenticity and seeing, where in your community you can get involved as well. There's NGLCC where, there's lots of different ways to get involved with the Chamber of Commerce and local opportunities for like volunteering. I know a lot of firms that I, have worked at in the past, they have a, monthly volunteer day. And so, maybe your monthly volunteer day one quarter is going in and, figuring out where in your community has different LGBTQIA needs and going and volunteering there. And, there's a lot that you can do as an ally. Any of these groups that we've mentioned, it's not like there's not gates and barriers of access if you, aren't in the LGBTQ community. It's everybody is welcome. And so just getting involved and showing up is what's really important, and just being curious and learning too.
Chris?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite resources that Corey already alluded to is the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, because yes, there's a lot of work you're doing to work with this community, but also think about your partners, right? We serve the entire human. And so this means the insurance broker, a real estate agent, the estate attorney, Sophia knows. We need to find partners that can also serve and work with this community. And that helps with the referral network. That helps with you building your team to strategically work with this community. And I often lean on the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce to find out other partners who are already members of the community, if they're on here. And so they understand how to speak to the community. They've had a similar story. And to build that Rolodex, right? And so I think it's important for us to not just think about ourselves and how we build awareness with working with this community, but how do we partner with people who are showing up on the same journey?
Well, I love that because it means it's really going to accelerate some of this fine tuning, like the language, how to handle documents, the process, how to coach employees through, your firm's communication preferences and all that kind of thing. It sounds like if you've got sort of this informal board of advisors and you're helping others and they're helping you, all of a sudden it's just you get to that tipping point really fast and okay, this is how we operate, and you can share also back channel stories too, I would guess, about troubleshooting. So Sophia, bring us home. Tell us some of your experiences.
Well, number one, I want to share, if you're looking for estate planning attorneys in your area or even CPAs in your area, to refer your clients to who are looking for, which attorneys can I feel comfortable working with? There's sort of two places that you can sort of do some homework and find appropriate professionals. The first place is if you go to your local bar association's website, there's often continuing education seminars that they post a public calendar, and you can see which attorneys are delivering those seminars. Usually we're doing it for free. It's because we're really impassioned about the subject. And so find the seminars within the areas that are important to your clients, right? If you're looking at same-sex adoption or a same-sex couple who's adopting a child, if you're looking for, clients that need assistance with updating estate documents, all of that, you can find seminars that are relevant to those areas and then look at who's delivering them. That's a nice place to start. And then the other is on the local bar association websites. Oftentimes you'll find different communities that lawyers can join. So you can look for, LGBT communities of attorneys and those associations, and then sort of make your headway in with those groups.
Thank you. Well, we've got some good questions coming in, and I'm going to ask the American College staff to chime in as well, but I see one good one already, and that is, and it kind of wraps together several of the points that we've heard this afternoon already. And the question involves if you're working on what sounds like a fairly complex plan, and it turns out that the client is just embarking on some sort of transition, how do you I'm just going to summarize this. I believe the question is, how do you just prevent the dynamic of continuing to reinvent the wheel and going back and just redoing documents where you say, oh, we started out with one gender identity, or and now we have another. How do you create kind of a flexible process that enables you to keep up with the client's situation? And I would guess, based on what our panelists has said this afternoon, that this probably will be happening, because if people are hesitant, or it takes them a little while to warm up to you, to be sure that you're going to be okay with some more intimate elements of their personal journey that might have a direct impact on the financial plan and legal ramifications and such, you might have that plan started and then find out that you have to either um, take a couple steps back, do a little renovation, catch up, revise. So could we just address, and this sounds to me like where people live, right? It's like, well, how much, ongoing revision do I have to do? How would you panelists address this?
I can jump in. I think, advising the clients, or actually advising the, attorneys and things that are working with the clients, to use as much gender neutral language as possible, or, whatever language can be flexible. For example, you can have, in a client's will, let's say if their child is considering transitioning, or they know that their child may be having some questions about gender identity, but they haven't definitively, moved in one direction or another. They can put language in there like, all my assets to my child so-and-so. If they change their name, this bequest is not canceled if they change their name in the future, so that way you can be creative, and it's not all locked in, and you can then address these different situations. Unfortunately, sometimes we will need to go back and revise plans, but isn't that part of being an advisor, right? And an attorney, as an attorney, I've had clients come back a few times because their life situation changes, and that's just part of, what we've agreed to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point, that life happens for everybody. So
I was just going to add on to that too. All of our clients go through life changes. People get married, people get divorced, people have children, people adopt. There's all these different life changes, and we're always changing the plan. We don't come up with one plan and say, all right, you got to stick to this for the next 30 or 40 years. Like, that's not what we do at all. We're very flexible in the work. And this is no different than any other, big life change that's happening. You support them, you work through them. If you have to change and do things, that's part of our job.
Is part of this part of the intake process, where especially if the person is referred by another LGBTQIA client, or you have an indication right off the bat that this is probably their life situation, do you signal that right off the bat and say, hey, let's just talk about flexibility, let's just talk about how we handle, I don't know, in the fee structure, if we need to revise within a year, if some element of your identity changes, or if you move to a state that has more or less rights and protections, or whatever it might be. Do you signal that right off the bat? I don't know that clients, to be honest, assume that if they're new to working with an advisor, they may not realize that plans change over the course of their life. Like, if you ask them, they might say, okay, yeah, but I'm not sure that they would assume that right off the bat. So
I think on that point, oh, sorry. I was going to say, I think on that point, that's part of the initial conversation of what is financial planning at your firm, right? And is it hourly? Is it ongoing retainer? Is it some kind of other structure? And how do you help? Showing the client, how do you help with them if they were to engage with you? I think that all sort of hones in on where this would go, because as their life ebbs and flows, as everyone says here, that's where we step in as the planner. Like, we are here to help mitigate all ups and downs and successes and failures, and that's part of the relationship and the partnership that we carry as the advisor. And so I think where you fit in that journey comes out in that initial conversation of, here's what planning looks like for us, and whether it's one time, ongoing, whatnot.
Kind of a good opportunity too to help the client envision how you walk with them through, maybe very traditional life stages like retirement, which I think is a pretty universal goal, and just help them envision that those touch points, that they will be working with you on those, and maybe from there, they realize, oh, of course, right, then additional touch points that might be unique to me would also be a point where I would want to come back, have this discussion. And so kind of build in that expectation. Am I right with that? Yeah, okay. American
Joanne,
College staff, lovely people. Do
Yeah.
we have some priorities or questions that we want to address? I know our time is starting to come to a close here.
Yes, I'd like to jump in with some maybe tactical questions. So one of the questions was, I have a relationship with a client. I'm going to be working with them for insurance. Do you ask what gender they were born in terms of insurance? Somebody said they're, they started down the path and then they found out that they were born something else. Has that ever happened, and how do you deal with something like that?
Corey, is that something you can pick up?
I haven't asked that question. I haven't come across that situation yet in my practice.
Yeah, I was just
Okay.
about to wonder, I think, if it's relevant, and I was trying to think of a situation where it might be. What you could do is on an intake form or in an intake conversation, say, are there any other names or preferred pronouns you would like me to use? And I did see some questions on our side of the chat that you said we're a little concerned about backlash, right? Especially if an individual is not often, like Deja mentioned, if we haven't built up that comfort of working with LGBTQIA clients and we're afraid of backlash from other clients. But I would go back to kind of what we discussed in the last question is we're all in this profession to help people, right? And to help them achieve their goals. And any type of familial situation or family situation or client situation, we're going to have to execute our skills to help them, right? Accomplish what they need to do. And so there are certain planning considerations that we need, and asking pronouns and asking for preferred names is part of that. And it's required for us, right, in order to execute our job. So, hopefully that will help an advisor have that conversation with a client who may be, if they're put off or whatever by, why are you asking me my pronouns? Don't you know what my pronouns are? And you can say, well, I want to be respectful of you, right, and of all of my clients that walk through this door.
I love that that backup too of making sure it's technically correct, because nobody's going to argue with that, right?
Right.
It's like we want to make sure these documents are correct, legal, they're going to be filed. This is an expensive and demanding process. We want to make sure that literally every word is correct and reflects your situation so that there's no question, sir, madam, they, them, whoever. I mean, nobody's going to argue with correctness. I would not think.
Somebody put in the question, some cities have domestic partnerships where individuals can register with the county and receive certain benefits. Are you aware of these designations, and can you explain the benefits of this type of arrangement?
From a legal perspective, it would depend on the state, right? So going back to that adoption issue, if there's a domestic partnership, the domestic partner might actually have standing as a parent, depending on the state's law. So unfortunately, I can't give very detailed information because it really is state dependent. But in many cases, if you have a domestic partnership or common law marriage, that other partner may have some standing, to collect benefits, to have custody of a child. But the best thing to do if there are questions about that would be to go, to an attorney who can assist a family law attorney.
That's great, Sophia. Thank you. Have any of you who work in the LGBTQIA community received any backlash? Somebody asked if the what was going on in some of the larger corporations has impacted any of your business in a similar way. Good. I'm seeing a lot of head shaking. That's good.
I would say it's more of a positive. Yeah.
Wonderful. That's wonderful.
Well, at Investment News, we've gotten some criticism for being too woke. I'd rather be woke than asleep, I guess.
Somebody asked, they've been receiving marketing solicitations from Pridely community guides to advertise my community-friendly business. Is this a legitimate and trusted resource? Does anybody know Pridely?
Never
Okay.
heard of it.
Okay, that might be an answer. Just trying to screen through the questions here. Deja, if you're comfortable asking somebody after you gave your pronoun, we're talking about your pronouns and the importance of proper pronouns, they don't understand they, them. And if you're comfortable talking about what it means to be non-binary or not associate with other pronouns.
My greatest analogy is that the sun rises and it sets, and it's on a spectrum all day until it sets. Some days I feel very femme, and some days I feel very masculine, but I've never ever felt like a girl, and I never wanted to be a man. I feel like Deja, and Deja is who I am, and I think they, them represents my duality of who I am, and that's how I prefer to be addressed. I always appreciate when people acknowledge me for who I am and who I say I am, my chosen name and pronouns, right? Deja is the God-given name my mom provided me, and I love it and I use it, but it's centered around who I am, who I feel I am, but then also understanding that I don't feel like a woman, I don't feel like a man, and I feel like I'm somewhere in between. And that's okay with me and everyone that loves me.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Somebody else asked if the LGBTQ plus community would be inclusive of the straight community when doing business, or will they only migrate to advisors? So for those of you in business, do you do business with straight people too?
Yes.
Absolutely.
We have a lot of straight advisors who also work with the LGBTQ plus community. So like they don't have to work with a queer advisor. Yes, there's a commonality there, and that could help. But ultimately, who you choose to work with is just part of that journey and who you're comfortable with.
And I think it's a comfort level too. So, Chris, you mentioned earlier about using imagery on the website, right? In order so that before you even meet with a client, they know that you're comfortable working with them. And I shared a story with this group, earlier, that I had a client that called into our firm and they spoke with a different attorney, but they were going through a divorce, and they asked, are you comfortable working with us? We're a lesbian couple. And that was sort of a wake up call for me, because I don't identify as LGBTQIA, but I felt like, wow, we should have put that on our website, right? Or they shouldn't have had to ask that question, because we just assumed that they would know that we were okay working with our firm. But they didn't, and they didn't know that. And so we, need to do a better job of proactively making that message clear.
Well, that's a great message to end on, because at the end of the day, we're all more alike than we are different. And I want to thank all of our panelists and our fantastic moderator for leading us through this discussion. I think based on all of the questions that we got, I think it was very informative. And I want to thank everybody again for this important discussion. Our panelists have provided a bunch of resources that we put in the chat. Feel free to use them or to reach out to any of us for additional information. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all.